Hi, this is Merman here. I'm gonna give a little bit of a RBY 1v1 info dump. I don't know if I'm actually gonna upload this, but I figured it would at the very least be useful for a potential script later. Now, RBY 1v1, of course, is an extremely unique metagame, taking both everything about 1v1 and everything about RBY and mixing them is certainly a metagame. um, Big things about 1v1, of course, it's you bring three Pokemon, you bring a team of three Pokemon, you pick one of them, and then it's a 1v1. Whoever faints first loses, there's no switching out. There's also Team Preview, which is normally not functional, or normally not in RBY. Same thing applies to other gens without Team Preview. Now, RBY mechanics, very important. The two biggest ones are freeze and crits. Starting with crits, depending on the Pokemon's speed stat, the base speed stat, your crit rate will be higher. For instance, a Pokemon like Snorlax has a very low crit rate, while a Pokemon like Jolteon has extremely high critical hit rates. This helps Pokemon like the aforementioned Jolteon, Tauros, Starmie, Alakazam break through things incredibly well. Crits do 2 times damage in this generation. Technically, I believe it doubles your level in the damage calculation, so it's not quite 2 times damage. Though it also ignores every boost. For instance, if you set up with 3 Sword Stances, for instance, and you get a crit, it'll act like you didn't boost at all. Though, of course, this also affects if your opponent had, let's say, like a bunch of defense curls or acid armors up or whatever. Now with freeze, it's permanent. It's just permanent. The only way to get rid of freeze is getting hit by a fire move. That's not Fire Spin, but Fire Spin's banned anyway. And having your opponent use the move Haze, which is just kind of not going to happen. Speaking of banned things, Explosion, Self-Destructor banned, because it causes ties. Partial trapping moves, the likes of Wrap, Clamp, Bind, Fire Spin, are banned because without the ability to switch out, there's not too much you can do about it. Similar to Sand Attack, that's banned. Of course, Double Team, Minimize are also banned. And then Mew and Mewtwo are banned because those guys are way too strong for this metagame. But everything else is pretty much legal. Other just random mechanics. Blizzard is 90% accurate in this game. 120 power, as you can see on the screen right now, actually. Fire Blast has a 30% chance to burn. Thunder only has a 10% chance to paralyze. There are a bunch of different moves that have small effects changed like that. For instance, Psychic is a good example. Psychic has a 33% chance to drop special by one stage. Moves like Counter is an interesting one. Counter only counters the damage of normal and fighting moves, so it does have some very weird mechanics that I don't even think I can explain. Reflect is basically like a one-time use Iron Defense. There's a lot of different stuff. You can see like Rock Slide doesn't have a secondary effect in this game. There's just a lot of stuff. I can't even explain it all. Before we actually get into each of the sets, I wanted to go over just the general tier list. Of course, you can pause here, take a look. I'll also try to remember to put it in the description. This is my tier list. It's in order. There are a couple things that I would have changed. This is the tier list at the time of making the video. Specifically, oops. I probably would move Zapdos a bit higher, maybe Chansey a bit lower. Lower tiers, biggest one is Moltres. Sorry, this is hard. I would probably move Moltres down, honestly. Not too much other than that, but just figured I would put that here so you guys actually have a bit of a representation of how I stand on everything. And again, I'll make sure to put something like this in the description. But anyway, I think it's probably a good time to get started with the Pokemon, starting with the best Pokemon in the entire format being Snorlax. Snorlax, of course, has a great stats all around. Now, it doesn't have the insanely high special defense that it has in later generations, because special is one stat. I forgot to mention that. Basically, you just have one special stat. If that raises or falls, it affects both your special attack and special defense, which is extremely strong for certain Pokemon, like Snorlax, because you have Amnesia. Amnesia boosts your special by 2 stages. Combined with Snorlax's extremely high HP stat, with Amnesia up, it's very hard to break through it, especially. and its 110 attack allows it to hit very hard on the physical side, and Amnesia allows it to hit pretty hard on the special side too. Now, Body Slam is an insane move in Generation 1, especially. It cannot paralyze normal types, just how it is, due to the way they coded it. But being able to paralyze non-normal types makes so many matchups against Snorlax, at best, like a 70% chance to win, because you can just get paralyzed. Because a lot of the ways that Pokemon try to beat Snorlax is just by outspeeding it and 3 or 2 KOing it. Or if you're Exeggutor, whittling it down with Leech Seed Toxic. But you can't do that if you're paralyzed, because paralysis quarters your speed in this gen. And with max EVs, which is something else I forgot to mention, every Pokemon has max EVs, Snorlax will outspeed you all the time if your opponent is paralyzed and Snorlax isn't. And, of course, Body Slam is going to hit incredibly hard. Hyper Beam, as well, just hits incredibly hard. It's specifically useful for stuff like the Mirror, non-Leer Tauros. There's a couple other matchups. It's just a great finisher. Amnesia, I already explained. It's a very strong move. Body Slam, by the way, is basically going to be on 99% of sets. It's very useful, especially for Alakazam and Jolteon, which are 2 big Pokemon in the metagame. Now, Thunderbolt can be replaced by Blizzard or Ice Beam. Thunderbolt is useful for hitting the likes of Starmie and Articuno, which are otherwise great checks to Snorlax. Blizzard is just a strong ice move, hits most things neutrally, and also specifically Blizzard over Ice Beam beats Rhydon and gives you better odds into Zapdos. Ice Beam can be also useful. It has more PP and more accuracy than Blizzard, which means you can freeze fish better. I personally think it's the worst of the 3 options, but it's still a solid option. Now we have Reflect. Now, Body Slam, Hyper Beam are basically mandatory on this set, because the goal of Reflect here is to beat Tauros, because Tauros can utilize Leer into Body Slam into Hyper Beam to beat Snorlax, since Snorlax cannot paralyze Tauros because it's a normal type. Now, technically you don't need Hyper Beam, but it definitely increases your odds against Tauros a lot. It makes you much less susceptible to crits, which Tauros, with its very high speed stat, is very good at getting. Ice Beam is the primary option here. You don't need Blizzard for Rhydon with Reflect, and against Zapdos, without Amnesia, Blizzard doesn't do much anyway, so you're better off just running Ice Beam. You could also run Thunderbolt if you're really worried about, like, Kabutops, but I think Ice Beam is just much better here. This set is just really good against Tauros if you need a good Tauros check, though not having Amnesia does hurt. Now, another really good answer against Snorlax is Chansey. Now, this set, beats it. Chansey's game plan against Snorlax is to set up a Reflect, use its massive special bulk to be okay, even if it sets up an Amnesias, and eventually freeze Snorlax with Ice Beam. The idea behind Amnesia plus Sub plus Ice Beam is you can set up Amnesias, substitute, and their Ice Beams won't be able to break your substitute, and then you can spam Ice Beam and freeze them. The last move here is Body Slam, which is just, again, generally a great move to have. A big part about Snorlax is being able to beat the likes of Alakazam and Jolteon, and having Body Slam is great. You can also, in theory, replace it with something like Thunderbolt or Blizzard or whatever, but I think Body Slam is 100% the way to go on this specific set. You do lose out on specific Tauros matchups. Big thing about Snorlax, it does have some opportunity cost, which is important to keep in mind when using it. The next set here actually takes advantage of your opponent assuming about the opportunity costs. The idea is you do give up, again, the Tauros matchup, but you have the coverage of both Blizzard and Thunderbolt, so you can beat the likes of Rhydon, you can beat the likes of Articuno, Starmie, you do very well into Zapdos. You can just hit things very hard. Body Slam I already mentioned. It's pretty simple, this set. I haven't seen it used much, but the little I've used of it, it's very solid. Again, really, you do lose out a bit on the Mirror, because Hyper Beam is pretty useful in the Mirror, and you lose out on Tauros, non-Leer Tauros specifically, without Hyper Beam, and just Tauros odds in general, but it's still pretty solid. The last main set here I have is definitely the worst one out of the ones I've mentioned, but a pretty fun one. Earthquake hits Gengar, which otherwise does very well into you, and Bubble Beam's fun. Now, Bubble Beam is just for Rhydon. Well, it's not just for Rhydon. It's actually also useful in the Snorlax mirror, Basically, unless you get very high rolls or a crit, Body Slam into Hyper Beam won't KO your opponent. And in Gen 1, Bubble Beam has a 33% chance to drop the opponent's speed. So what you can do is Body Slam. If you didn't get really lucky with your Body Slams, you can go for a Bubble Beam turn 3, go for the speed drop with Bubble Beam, and then go for Hyper Beam. Something to keep in mind with a lot of Pokemon is it's usually a lot of the time with moves like Thunderbolt, Ice Beam, for faster Pokemon, the odds of getting a crit is higher than getting the secondary effect. So if you need to fish for something like that, you're better off going for the crit. But with Snorlax, since it's so slow, it's actually better to go for secondary effects pretty much every time, especially with the likes of Body Slam and Bubble Beam. Since Body Slam can't paralyze Snorlax, Bubble Beam's your way to go. Now, of course, this is countered by Reflect Snorlax, though Reflect Snorlax doesn't like Amnesia Snorlax. In theory, you could also run Amnesia plus Reflect, but that is very hard to fit on one set. Now with Snorlax, you can also have a lot of other options. These are just a couple. I think I saw like Psychic and Fire Blast in the recent RBY 1v1 Cup, though I wouldn't necessarily recommend them. Rest, you'd think would be on a lot of Snorlax sets, but it does make Snorlax extremely susceptible to the likes of crits and special drops from Psychic. And plus Snorlax really wants all of its moves. It already has a lot of 4 moveslot syndromes, so that's really why Rest isn't common. Counter is a cool option. You can possibly run over Reflect. It does make you weaker into Rhydon, but it can just catch opposing Snorlaxes off guard, even like Leer Tauroses, and just, it's okay. It's the main reason to use it is to help in the Lax Mirror. And then Toxic is cool, I guess, for Pokemon that don't run Rest, like opposing Snorlaxes, like Chansey. Like maybe some sort of Rest, Toxic, Amnesia, Reflector counter set could work, or maybe Body Slam over one of those moves. Who knows? There's still a good amount of experimentation that Snorlax can go through. It's definitely the Pokemon with the most options in the entire metagame, and that's that combined with its great traits, its normal typing, having only one weakness, which is extremely rare. It's only on Hitmonlee pretty much, and it's just amazing stats, allows Snorlax to do very well. Oh yeah, and the normal typing also gives, of course, Stab to Body Slam, Hyper Beam, which are only resisted by Rhydon, and then an honorable mention being Golem. So that's Snorlax. So after Snorlax, we have Alakazam. Alakazam, I kind of view as a polar opposite to Snorlax, despite being the second best mon in the metagame. As you can see here, contrary to Snorlax's Giga Slow Speed, it's extremely fast, the second fastest mon in the metagame after Jolteon, giving it an extremely high crit rate. It also has an incredibly high special stat. It does make it very specially bulky, though its HP stat's a bit middling, but it has a very, very good special attack. It's the highest special attack in the entire metagame, combined with a stab psychic that can drop your special stat and a really high crit rate. If this mon gets enough turns, you will not be able to wall it with the likes of Rest. And that's why it loves Toxic. It can Toxic, stall with Substitute and Recover, and until it wins, or until it forces a Rest, which is basically just a win. Alakazam's biggest weakness is, of course, its HP and defense being very low. This means it's susceptible to the likes of Tauros, Snorlax, even like Body Slam Rhydon, and more niche options like Dragonite and Clefable. But it is still a very, very good Pokemon at beating the very common special attackers. Basically, there's exactly one special attacker that matches up well into Alakazam, being Slowbro, with its combination of its Psychic typing, access to Amnesia, and using Rest to get rid of Toxic. It can just wall Alakazam. But basically, every single other special attacker loses to Alakazam, unless they go extremely far out of their way, and even then it's very iffy. Alakazam does have some other options, but I wouldn't really recommend them. They would all be over Substitute. Now, the reason to be over Substitute is because Substitute is mainly there to help you dodge the likes of Freeze, the likes of Body Slam Paras, if it comes down to that, and especially the likes of crits. So if you want to, you can replace it with something like Reflector Counter, which in theory improves your odds against the normal types and just the mons using normal type moves to strong physical moves against you. Now, Counter into Psychic actually doesn't do enough damage to Snorlax most of the time, but Counter does help with Tauros as long as you don't get paralyzed or crit. Reflect is like slightly better in the Lax against Lax, but like really, I really wouldn't recommend it. I also included Thunder Wave. I don't remember what it would be even for. I would just stick to the main Alakazam set pretty much 99 times out of 100. It's just so good at what it does. It has very few Pokemon that do well against it, and even the Pokemon like Tauros and Rhydon that are supposed to beat it have like less than a 60% chance to. This Pokemon's insane. I can see an argument for it being the best. I don't think so. I think Snorlax is definitely the best, but it's, in my opinion, a firm number 2. Moving on, we have Starmie. Starmie, pretty somewhat similar to Alakazam. Though, I forgot to mention with Alakazam, Psychic typing. Pure Psychic typing is great. You are neutral to the 2 main special attacking options in Blizzard or Ice Beam, and then Thunderbolt. And having Stab Psychic is huge. Now with Starmie, with the extra water typing, you resist Ice, but you are weak to Electric, which is, it's a double-edged sword. It's good and bad. Starmie is somewhat similar to Alakazam, being very fast, though a bit slower. Somewhat strong, with the special stat of 100, but it's not the best, but it definitely gets the job done. Unlike Alakazam, it actually has a decent physical bulk, which is paired well with its access to recover, access to reflect, and its great speed. So despite not looking like a great physical wall, Starmie can set up a reflect immediately before your physical attackers get to attack, and go from there. Now this is the main set: Psychic, Ice Beam, or Thunderbolt. This can be either. Reflect, recover. This allows it to beat the likes of non-Thunderbolt Snorlax. It beats Tauros. It beats non-Thunderbolt Chansey. You'll notice a trend of non-Thunderbolt X with Starmie. It's just a solid choice. I know the team of Starmie, Snorlax, Alakazam is very popular, though it is a little weak to Thunderbolt Snorlax because of Starmie. You can tell I don't have the most... I'm not the biggest Starmie fan in the world, but I do think it's still a very, very solid Pokemon. Now, sometimes you will want Psychic, Ice Beam, and Thunderbolt. Psychic, of course, is extremely strong. Gen 1 Psychic. Ice Beam gives you good chances to freeze against the likes of Amnesia Snorlax, against the likes of Chansey. And Thunderbolt is really useful in the mirror, and also against something like Articuno. The Articuno can't really break through you. It allows you to have less odds to get frozen. So if you need all of those, you can go for 3 attacks, and you drop Reflect, or you drop Recover. This does make you more susceptible to Snorlax and Tauros, but having all 3 moves can be useful on Starmie sometimes. You don't really want to drop Psychic, so if you're thinking about running Bolt Beam, I mean, you can try it, but having Psychic is just huge. But that's pretty much it for Starmie. I have seen other options. Surfer Hydro Pump might be able to do something, but in general, Ice Beam, Thunderbolt, Psychic hits everything you need to. Thunder Wave can be used. It definitely worsens your Snorlax, your Tauros, and especially your Snorlax matchup, but it helps a bit in the mirror. Toxic Rest can be used to beat Chansey if you don't want to go for the freeze fishing route. Rest in general is also useful for Toxic. You can try to pretend to beat Alakazam with Rest, but it doesn't work, really. But I would mainly just stick to some combination of Psychic, Ice Beam, Reflect, Recover, T-Bolt. And I guess Thunder is also a thing if you want to try to improve your odds against opposing Starmie even more. I wouldn't really recommend it that often, but it is a thing. So yeah, that's Starmie. Now we have Tauros, a Pokemon that I'm sure a lot of people who know about RBY would have expected to be higher. Now, the main thing with Tauros is it's a physical attacker with a lot of speed. This gives it very high crit rate. It also has the same thing with Snorlax. Stab, Body Slam, Stab, Hyper Beam, and its attack stat is only a little bit lower than Snorlax. This is the standard set. Body Slam, Hyper Beam, Leer, which is useful against Snorlax, and also in theory could be used to dodge counter if you anticipate it, and then either Blizzard or Earthquake. Both hit Rhydon. Blizzard helps a lot in the Exeggutor matchup, while Earthquake does a bit better into the likes of Electrics. It can't miss. And by Electrics, I mean Jolteon and Raichu, I guess. But Earthquake's actually, I believe, the standard, but I like Blizzard a bit more. It's just a strong attacker. It has really good odds into most things because it's the combination of high crit rate and Body Slam paralysis. Worst case scenario, you can always go for the Blizzard Freeze if you have it, or a Hyper Beam crit. It's just solid. It hits a lot of the more physically frail Pokemon like Jolteon, Alakazam really hard. Unfortunately, it is fairly walled by Reflect Starmie, though you can even break through it with Body Slam paralysis. You can use Leer to abuse Gen 1 mechanics, reapply their speed drop from Psychic, and then outspeed them, and then you can just Body Slam Hyper Beam them. Leer is just very strong because it allows Tauros to break through Snorlax. At least Snorlax is without Reflect or Counter, with Leer and Body Slam into Hyper Beam. It's just a very strong Pokemon. I used to not like Tauros as much, but with Leer, it's just very solid. Now, this was the set I was running a lot before. Body Slam, Hyper Beam, Earthquake, and then Fire Blast. You can also replace Fire Blast with Blizzard, but Fire Blast is nice in the mirror. It helps against the aforementioned Snorlax a bit as well. Still hits Eggy, and you have Earthquake for Rhydon anyway. Fire Blast with its 30% burn chance just can muscle through a lot of Pokemon. In the mirror, you can go Slam, Blast, Beam, and have slightly better odds. It's very similar to the Leer set. It has worse odds against Snorlax. In general, it's not as good as Leer, but sometimes you kind of want both Earthquake and Fire Blast, or Blizzard, so you can go with it. Lastly, here I have a little bit more of a niche set, Body Slam, Hyper Beam, Toxic Rest. This is primarily used to beat Reflect Chansey, because Chansey has a very hard time fitting Rest in its moveset, and Body Slam, Hyper Beam is both still needed just for power. It's basically mandatory on every Tauros set. Rest is just nice for maybe opposing Toxic users or just opposing weaker Pokemon that try to win by just being really bulky, like Chansey. It's pretty physically bulky. Normal typing's great, of course, because you are immune to Body Slam paralysis. And you actually beat every Pokemon that tries to use a fighting move. Even Machamp has like a 40% chance to beat Tauros. It's insane. Though I will admit, a lot of Tauros' matchups are a bit coin flippy, because while you have these great traits with high crit rate and Body Slam paras, your special Tauros' main weakness is its special and HP stat are like fine, but strong special attackers like the likes of Zapdos, Articuno, Alakazam can do good damage. And it's really fast, but Starmie, Alakazam, Jolteon, all out speed, and with luck can win. So it's not the most consistent thing, but if you have the right matchups for Tauros, it's an extremely strong Pokemon. Hey, this is a post-production Merm here. I think I did a really poor job with Chansey here, so I'm actually gonna go over that again. So here's Chansey. It's a normal type, which is amazing. Immune to Body Slam paralysis is really important because it uses Reflect to wall the normal types, Tauros and Snorlax. Mainly Snorlax, of course. It also has amazing special bulk with its massive HP, which also makes up for its extremely low defense. Its speed is not great. It wishes it outsped Exeggutor, but at least it outspeeds Snorlax and Rhydon, which is huge. Main set, you always see Ice Beam. You always see either Reflect or I have here Counter, though I think Reflect is much more reliable. You can try to catch something off guard with Counter. You always see Soft Boiled, and then the last move is either T-Bolt, T-Wave, or Rest. So T-Bolt is my personal favorite option. It allows Chansey to beat Starmie and Articuno, and also like Lapras, which it otherwise struggles with because they are either immune to freeze or are resistant to Ice Beam and can freeze you before you freeze them. And Thunderbolt allows you to deal with those. T-Wave is also a nice option for Tauros in particular, because Tauros, without T-Wave, can use Leer 4 times and then kill you even through Reflect with a Hyper Beam. Or if they don't have Leer, they can potentially just spam Body Slam, have a lot of chances to crit you, and you'll have to spam Soft Boiled a lot. But with T-Wave, you can T-Wave them, and if they're Leer, they have to, 1, not get frozen or crit by any of your Ice Beams, or they have to not get paralyzed a single time, which is just not that likely for Tauros to get off. So Thunderwave is oh wait, no, they couldn't be frozen because you're T-Waving them. Oh boy. But it allows Chansey to be Tauros, that's the point. And Rest is useful because a lot of Pokemon like Jolteon and some more niche Pokemon like Raichu, also Tauros can do this, run Toxic to try to beat Chansey. And you can run Rest to beat Toxic, which is very good. Now, Chansey does have some annoying matchups. Certain Psychics can just wear it down, either with Psychic drops, Starmie can freeze it, and also Exeggutor can use Leechy Toxic and just destroy it, because unfortunately it's pretty slow. But it is just very bulky, and it fulfills the role of a Snorlax Tauros beater on a team while having a lot of other solid matchups. That's Chansey. Now we have Jolteon. This is the main set. Thunderbolt, of course, hits very hard with electric typing. Having stab, Thunderbolt hits hard, especially with its pretty solid special and amazing speed, giving it very high crit rate. Similar to Zam, it has a low HP defense stat, so it's not quite as low. It's still going to feint to likes of Tauros, Snorlax, stuff like that. Electric typing, you're weak to ground, and in general, you can't really touch ground types, so Rhydon's an issue. But you're also resist electric while being neutral to ice, which is nice. Thunderbolt hits incredibly hard, punishes stuff like Starmie. You hit Articuno hard, you hit Lapras hard. You hit everything hard except for Rhydon and Grasses, but Pin Missile hits Exeggutor and Venusaur super effectively, quad super effectively. In Generation 1, Poisons actually hit super effectively by Bug, and I believe Bug is also quad weak to Poison. So Pin Missile hits Venusaur super effectively. Toxic plus Rest is the last two move slots to do well in the Chansey and also help in the mirror. You can also run Thunder Wave over Toxic. I'm not the biggest fan of it. You give up Chansey matchup, and it supposedly helps a little bit in the mirror, but I'm not the biggest fan of it. Another set that I made, which is not great but pretty funny, is Anti-Alakazam. The idea is you click Tail Whip into Pin Missile into Hyper Beam, and you kill a lot of Alakazams before they can kill you with Psychic Spam. Though, of course, if you get dropped or crit, it gets a lot shakier. I haven't tested this enough to tell you if it was even in Jolteon's favor to win, but it's probably better than the normal set. You keep Thunderbolt and Pin Missile as well, though you give up Chansey. So maybe it is worth using. Who knows? And then other options, it's just Thunder Wave. Jolteon's move pool is not the greatest. You can, in theory, try Double Kick, but it actually doesn't do enough damage to Chansey. You're better off going for Toxic Rest and just praying they're not Rests themselves. I guess if you ran Toxic Rest Double Kick, Thunderbolt gave up the Grass-type matchups, and go from there, that could work. Not too sure how much Double Kick does, but it definitely could be an option that you can consider. But Jolteon, in general, the main reason to use it over Alakazam, because they have very similar matchups, and Alakazam's more consistent in a lot of those matchups, is Slowbro. Thunderbolt just nukes Slowbro, and Alakazam cannot dream of getting past Slowbro. But in exchange, it has much worse Rhydon matchup, just worse odds into most things, and it itself loses to Alakazam. There is a good chance that Jolteon is higher than this. I had Jolteon as the 4th best Pokemon for a long time. I had Jolteon in S for the longest time, but yeah. It's still a very solid Pokemon that I would recommend using if you need something like Alakazam that can beat Slowbro. Now we have the other main electric type of the metagame, Zapdos. Look at those stats. 125 specials, insane. 100 speed is solid, gives a decent crit rate. It's like the slowest Fastmon. I know a lot of people consider that as Jynx, but Jynx isn't that great. So it's like Zapdos is basically the slowest Fastmon. But it doesn't really matter because it matches up decently well until a lot of the mons that outspeed it. I mean, not really, actually, now that I think about it. You beat Starmie. It's like around a 50-50 with Tauros because you can Thunderbolt in the Thunder and KO it. But you need to land Thunder and not get haxed by Tauros because Tauros will hax you. Then you have Drill Peck, which helps against the grass types of the metagame. Also hits very hard if you get, for instance, Psychic Special dropped, or if you're against Pokemon like Gengar, Alakazam, that are very specially bulky, but very physically frail. Zapdos versus Alakazam is an interesting matchup. I saw a lot of Alakazams lose it. I'm not too sure if it was because they were misplaying it, or if because it's just a decent matchup for Zapdos, but I still think it's Alakazam favored. Hard to say. And Thunder Wave does help with that matchup. Thunder Wave, you give up some reliability against Snorlax, but it actually increases your odds against Tauros because you can Thunder Wave it and then you outspeed it, and it gives them chances to get fully paralyzed. It also helps with Alakazam, as previously mentioned. Thunder is basically just for Tauros, and in theory can be used if you need a big finisher. Now, you can also run Reflect over Thunder Wave, which gives you better odds into Snorlax, though it's still not the best. I believe it does really help if they are lacking Thunderbolt, or lacking Ice Beam, or Blizzard. But if they have it, it's like a 50-50 at best, I believe, for Zapdos. Now, another fun set is Anti-Rhydon, which sounds ridiculous. Rhydon is known as the Zapdos check of a lifetime. And since, in my opinion, Rhydon should be running Rest more specifically just for this matchup. Reflect means you cannot get 3-hit KO'd by Rhydon's Rock Slide unless they crit you. Toxic plus Rest allows you to just damage it, and then, of course, Thunderbolt is big damage. It's not the best set, especially if Rhydon starts running Rest more, especially because Rhydon doesn't necessarily need its last moveset that much, so it can afford to run Rest. I think it can work very well for Zapdos. Or it would work against Zapdos. But Zapdos was still a Pokemon that surprised me a lot during the RBY 1v1 Cup. It did very well win rate-wise, which of course win rate isn't the most accurate thing, but it was still a decent trend. A lot of people were using Zapdos, a lot of people were winning with Zapdos. And a lot of the matchups against the top tiers, it either goes around even or wins. Really, Chansey and Jolteon are the main two that Zapdos struggles with. That's one of the matchups Jolteon has over Alakazam, is a better Zapdos matchup, specifically against Thunderwave. But yeah, Zapdos just has really good stats all around. Somewhat physically bulky. It's not like the most physically bulky in the metagame, but it's still very strong. Even decent attack to use Drill Peck off of. It's just a great mon. Electric flying typing is great, but also not great. It would probably prefer to be pure electric besides Stab Drill Peck. I guess against the anti-Rhydon set, but flying typing is pretty bad in this metagame. Having, like, pure flying typing has the weakness to both ice and electric. So in Zapdos' case, it makes it neutral to electric, which means it loses to Jolteon and Raichu if it has Thunder. And it also gives it an ice weakness, which is obnoxious because stuff like Blizzard, Tauros can try to catch you off guard. Stuff like Ice Beam Starmie can freeze you. Well, I guess I could freeze it even if it wasn't. But it can crit it, I think, if it gets lucky. Amnesia, Ice Beam, Blizzard, Snorlax can try to beat you down. Articuno doesn't do the worst. I mean, it does lose usually. I don't know where I'm going with this, but the point is the flying typing's awful in this game. And you'll see that a lot later with more Pokemon, like the other legendary birds in particular. But yeah, that's the end of the really good top tiers, in my opinion. Starting out in the high tiers, we have Slowbro. Slowbro pretty much always runs Attack, Amnesia, either Counter or Reflect, and Rest. All of the attacks, which I have here and other options, have different things that they do. Ice Beam is the main one, just the Freeze Fish, because Freeze is instant win, and combination of Amnesia, Rest, and an Ice Resistance means Slowbro does pretty well against opposing Freeze Fishers and can just freeze them. Surf is useful for Rhydon, because Rhydon can actually do pretty well against Slowbro with Earthquake spam, especially if you're running Counter. And Psychic is useful for the likes of Gengar, I believe. I'm pretty sure it's just for Gengar. So the main thing you're running is Ice Beam or Surf. Amnesia, as previously mentioned with Snorlax, is amazing, especially with Slowbro's higher special stat than Snorlax. It also has very solid physical bulk, though it doesn't have anything to use its okay-ish attack stat for, and its speed is as low as Snorlax. It also has a not great matchup into Snorlax, though it can potentially win if it uses Counter or Reflect correctly. It's hard to say because Snorlax can potentially Amnesia up while you're sleeping with Rest, or it can just crit through you or Body Slam Para through you. It's awkward, I'll just say that. But Slowbro does have pretty solid matchups. As previously mentioned, it's the only special attacker that does really well into Alakazam, which is important. It of course loses to Electrics, but it does well into the likes of non-Thunderbolt Starmie. It does well into like Articuno unless it gets frozen. Stuff like that. It's a pretty solid Pokemon overall, though it does have some competition with Snorlax. You can also run it alongside a Snorlax, which is pretty solid. But that's Slowbro, basically. You can also run Thunderwave, I guess. You can run Toby Bro, which I saw somewhat in tournaments, but it's not the most reliable thing. It would replace Reflector Counter, but I think it's not that good. It's not that reliable. But yeah, that's basically Slowbro. Now we have Rhydon. Rhydon, of course, beats most Zapdos. With Rest, it beats all Zapdos. You beat Jolteon. You do well into certain Snorlaxes. Basically, Snorlax is lacking Reflect plus Ice Beam, Blizzard, or Bubble Beam, which doesn't sound like many Laxes, but there are a good amount of Slam Beam, Thunderbolt Laxes that you can take advantage of. Admittedly, Rhydon's definitely fallen off. I could even see this thing going lower, probably just below Articuno, which is next. Spoiler. Low speed, but still faster than Snorlax and Slowbro, which it can kind of break through with Earthquake. Low special, which means it just kind of drops to Ice Beams and especially Surfs, but very high Phys Def and very high attack. Unfortunately, with its low speed, despite having a normal resistance, which is huge, it still struggles with Snorlax and Tauros because they can just use Blizzard or Surf or even Earthquake to just break through you. And 130 base attack Earthquake is incredibly strong, but both of them can take it with the right stuff. Now, Earthquake is your main option, of course. Rock Slide is primarily just to hit Zapdos. It also gives you like a 9% chance to beat Articuno, which is fun. Body Slam gives you very slightly winning odds into Alakazam because you can paralyze it with one of your Body Slams as long as you don't get like crit or special drop too much. Last move is very flexible, though I think Rest is the best option now. You can also run the likes of Bubble Beam, Ice Beam, or Leer. You can also potentially maybe replace Rock Slide with Leer. That hasn't been tested too much. I know that's a thing that's sometimes run in OU. Bubble Beam is the main option that we were running for a while on Rhydon. It basically just helps in the mirror because Bubble Beam into Earthquake always KOs. Earthquake doesn't OHKO, so you can Bubble Beam, go for the speed drop. Similarly to Snorlax, it's more likely for you to get the speed drop with Bubble Beam than it is to get a crit with Earthquake. So you can go for Bubble Beam, try to lower speed, and then try to win the speed tie if you don't get the speed drop. Ice Beam is literally just there to freeze fish if in a losing matchup. That's literally it. I wouldn't recommend it too much, but if you want to go for that, you can. And Leer is also to potentially help against that anti-Rhydon Zapdos, and maybe against some other stuff. Again, it hasn't really been tested. But yeah, Rhydon's definitely been falling off. Though maybe with Zapdos rising in popularity and with Rest being a thing, will rise back up. Who knows? But a lot of Pokemon like Tauros, like Snorlax, like Slowbro, like even Zapdos have been learning to adapt to it. And having an ice weakness and combined with low special is just rough for Rhydon. But it's still decently solid on certain builds. If you need to be Jolteon, you need to have a decent matchup into Zam, decent matchup into Lax, Rhydon's your guy. Now, here's one of my favorite Pokemon in the metagame. I don't know why, but I really like it. Articuno. This is the set. You really don't see any other moves other than Blizzard, Ice Beam, Reflect, Rest. In theory, you could also run Toxic, but it's not really worth it. Blizzard, 120 base power, 90% accurate, hits incredibly hard off of Articuno's base. 125 special stat in this game. Articuno's actually a nuke. I believe Zapdos' Thunder, Articuno's Blizzard, and Moltres' Fire Blast are the strongest special moves in the game. It just hits so hard. Notably, Ice Beam into Blizzard kills Tauros, and it just does so much damage. It's also very bulky. Basically, the biggest thing holding back Articuno, because all of these traits sound great, right? It's the flying typing. A pure ice type Articuno would easily be top tier. But with that flying typing, giving it an electric weakness, it just struggles against the likes of Thunderbolt Starmie, Thunderbolt Snorlax, Thunderbolt Chansey, and the electrics Jolteon and Zapdos, and I guess Raichu. Yeah, it has so many good traits, it's just that one thing holding it back. Ice Beam is used if you... I know I'm like jumping around points. Ice Beam is really useful. It's 100% accurate, has 16 PP opposed to Blizzard's 8, so it's very useful for freeze fishing, which Articuno is great in the freeze fishing mirror because, of course, it is immune to freeze. So it can just spam Ice Beam until it freezes. You also have Blizzard, which has a bit more chances to get a freeze. I believe it's like you have slightly less than 23 chances on average to freeze, which is a lot of chances to freeze. The odds are very likely that you will get one. Reflect Rest, the last two moves, pretty standard. Reflect Rest to kind of help with stuff like T-Boltless Lax, T-Boltless Chansey, to try to wall them, because if you get low on health and you haven't frozen them yet, you can just Reflect Rest, or you can Rest, heal up, and try to go for them again with your Ice Beams and Blizzards to go for a freeze. But yeah, literally the only thing holding Articuno back is a flying typing. It's funny how good of a typing Ice is in Gen 1, because fire type moves are rare, rock type moves are rare, fighting type moves are rare. I forgot the other weakness, but it's also steel type moves don't exist. I think there might be one more weakness, but it's also rare. Having a neutrality to electric, not Articuno, but just the ice typing in general, and resistance to ice is huge, and being immune to freeze is huge, and having stab on Blizzard and Ice Beam. It's just such a shame that Articuno is held back by its flying typing. Before we get started with Eggy, actually, I wanted to talk about Eggy's history through RBY 1v1, because it's actually one of the more interesting Pokemon with historically. Now, with Exeggutor, it started out pretty much considered as one of, if not the best Pokemon in the metagame. This is just because it beat Snorlax and Slowbro more reliably than anyone knew at the time with just this set. This was always the set, substitute or rest at the last slot. And it just allowed him to beat two really big threats because they weren't too sure how to beat Amnesia users. Obviously, we're still struggling with that. I'm kidding. But eventually, Exeggutor was considered pretty much mandatory for every team to have. And over time, people have realized how important critical hits are. We've realized that there are a lot of Pokemon that can get around Snorlax. We've realized there are a lot of Pokemon that can make use of Snorlax's limitations. So Exeggutor has definitely fallen off. Another big part of that is the whole consistency issue that it has, which I'll cover on later. But yeah, I just wanted to cover that because I figured it's really interesting. This is post-production. Probably should have clarified that earlier. But yeah, that's kind of Exeggutor's history. Now let's get on to why it does what it does and how it does it. Eggy. Now, Psychic, Toxic, Leech Seed, Substitute is the main set. You can also run Rest over Substitute, which basically decreases your odds against basically everything, but increases your odds against the opposing Exeggutor. Exeggutor's typing is fine. Pure Psychic typing is good. Stab Psychic, along with that really high special stat, is great. Grass typing gives you an electric resist. Ice weakness. Ice weakness really sucks, but it doesn't really change Exeggutor's job, which is use Toxic into Leech Seed into substitute spam to weaken down Pokemon that are slower than it. These Pokemon being the likes of Rhydon, Chansey, Slowbro, and most importantly, Snorlax. Now, Leech Seed plus Toxic in Generation 1 is a very interesting combo. The way Leech Seed only does 6.25, I believe, percent per turn, which sounds awful, but it also is affected by Toxic's turn counter, because Toxic damage increases per turn. So you turn 1 Toxic them, turn 2 you Leech Seed them, and then all of a sudden, the Toxic damage is racking up, the Leech Seed damage is racking up, and you'll win in like 5 turns. If Exeggutor gets the combo off, it's basically an automatic win. The only thing is, Exeggutor matches up extremely poorly against basically everything that's faster than it. The only Pokemon that actually matches... There are very few Pokemon that matches up well against that's faster than it. And they're really like lower tier Pokemon like Gengar or Raichu or Hitmonlee. It also has a lot of consistency issues. You can get like paralyzed by a Body Slam or frozen by an Ice Beam. And Toxic and Leech Seed both don't have that great of accuracy. 80% and 90% respectively. Now, Substitute helps with the consistency issue. Rest also kind of helps a little bit because you can't get frozen while you're asleep. But it still makes Exeggutor have kind of shaky matchups. But the matchups it does have can be valuable on certain teams. Now, Exeggutor is a Pokemon that did so poorly in the RBY Cup, which is part of the reason I have it so low. But I had it low even before that. The consistency issues it has, combined with the low amount of good matchups it has, is rough, but having those matchups is just very important on certain teams. Now we have Gengar. You have basically 5 moves you're going to run on this thing. Psychic, Thunderbolt, Toxic, Rest, or Confuse Ray. A lot of people are more of a fan of Confuse Ray. I like Toxic a bit more. Basically, Confuse Ray increases your odds against Snorlax, while Toxic massively increases your odds against Chansey. Now, having better odds against Lax sounds great, and it is great, but I don't know, I just don't really see Gengar as a Lax check as much as I do a Chansey check. But honestly, either way, Gengar's not that great of a Pokemon. Ghost typing, great on paper. In practice, it's not that good. Tauros Earthquakes you. Lax can Earthquake you if it chooses to, but even then, it can just Amnesia up and spam Ice Beam or Thunderbolt. It's not the most reliable thing for Gengar to win. Psychic and Thunderbolt hit somewhat hard because your base 130 special stat and high crit rate with 110 speed. But without Stab, it's not doing that much damage. And a lot of Gengar's matchups are basically hoping that you get Confuse Ray hits, hoping that you get Psychic drops, and hoping you get crits. It still has some valuable matchups. You do well against a lot of Snorlaxes, which is very important. You do well against Articuno. You lose to Zapdos, actually, because you could just get drill pecked. Why am I blanking? I'll put more matchups on the screen. I'm just blanking right now. I apologize. But yeah, it's just Gengar struggles a lot with the matchups that it has, because low physical defense, no stab on its moves, pretty shallow move pool overall. Of course, a lot of Gengar's niche in something like OU is Explosion and Hypnosis, which are both banned. I forgot to mention earlier, Sleep's banned. Except Rest, obviously. Post-production Merm here again. I think I actually pretty undersold Confuse Ray. First, Confuse Ray just kind of helps a lot against Snorlax, like I already mentioned. It makes that matchup, unless they have Earthquake, of course, pretty reliable. I was saying, like, oh, they can just set up Amnesias, but it's not the best, especially because Gengar can get special drops with Psychic and can crit with its high crit rate. And also something I mentioned with Confuse Ray is it does make a lot more matchups more reliable. Of course, I say that a lot of matchups are reliant on Confuse Ray, but, you know, it's not that bad of a thing to have. I mean, obviously, you wish you were using a Pokemon that didn't have to rely on Confuse Ray, but it allows matchups to be reliable enough to have merit of using Gengar, if that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much Gengar. Pretty inconsistent, did really poorly in RBY 1v1 Cup when picked, though oddly enough, it had a very high brought win rate. So when it was brought on a team but not picked, it did very well, which was interesting to see. Though it did kind of, I guess that's, I don't know what that means. That's Gengar. That's like the last of the main 12 that we thought were the really only viable mons for a while. I guess there were like some C-tier mons where like, yeah, you could use them if you wanted to and do decently well. But yeah, that's the end of that. Now we have Sandslash, a Pokemon I really like, both just in general, but also in the context of this metagame. Now, Sandslash is unique as it does well into non-reflect Snorlax. It also does well into the likes of previously mentioned Gengar. It does well into Rhydon. It does well into Zapdos and Jolteon. It has some decently solid matchups overall. Now, something I should mention, now since I realized I forgot to mention it, high crit rate moves like Slash and Razor Leaf, auto crit if you go over a certain speed threshold, which is good, though of course it is a little weird to run it along Sword Stance. In theory, you could also run Body Slam. Admittedly, that hasn't been tested too much. But basically, Sandslash's job is to click Sword Stance, hit pretty hard with Earthquake, use Rock Slide and Zapdos, Slash if they like set up a Reflect and you just need to pray. Though honestly, it's probably better to run Body Slam. I don't know what's best in that third moveset there. Sandslash has some options. You can run Body Slam, Hyper Beam, like, I don't know, something like Submission. There's not too many moves this thing gets, but Sandslash is just an interesting Pokemon. You can just, it does okay against certain things. It's pretty useful. Now we have Hitmonlee. I named it Triple Kick because it uses 3 kicking moves as its primary set. It looks very weird, but it's purposeful. Hitmonlee's stats, excluding its very high attack and like pretty solid speed, are just atrocious. It's a piece of paper. A very sharp piece of paper, but a piece of paper. The main idea behind it is anything it can hit super effectively, except Tauros, it beats. Stuff like Snorlax, unless you get countered. Stuff like Chansey, unless you get countered. Rhydon, Lapras. It does pretty well into a lot of those, and funnily enough, it has actually very similar matchups to Exeggutor. The main difference is that Exeggutor beats Gengar, Hitmonlee beats Lapras, and I don't remember the other specifics. I think it has better odds into every matchup than Venusaur, but Venusaur can beat Hitmonlee or something. I don't remember. High Jump Kick, of course, is your main move. High Jump Kick and Jump Kick in Gen 1, due to the way they programmed it, takes 1 HP of damage if it misses, so missing it is not too bad, though of course you're not dealing damage, and you're probably going to get 2 KO'd. Jump Kick is actually used because it's very slightly more accurate than High Jump Kick. You can definitely drop this if you wanted to, but sometimes you need a High Jump Kick and a Jump Kick to KO things if you don't want to risk that extra 5% accuracy, because Rolling Kick, Rolling Kick's also super, not that accurate. So yeah, High Jump Kick and the Jump Kick is often your best play to KO things, which is very funny, especially because this thing does not get Hyper Beam for some reason. Yeah, Rolling Kick is basically there if you need to go for flinches, and Meditate is basically there in case you want to try to predict counter. Sub can also work very well with that if you wanted to. I like Meditate a little more, but probably Sub is better. Who knows? You can also try to run counter on Hitmonlee to maybe catch a Tauros off guard, but like Blizzard 2 KOs you, I believe. Blizzard and Hyper Beam definitely KOs 2 KOs you, and you're not going to KO it with a stab high jump kick, which is sad. You do like 60% to Snorlax with high jump kick. It's really sad, but still, Hitmonlee is like the only viable fighting type in the metagame, which is interesting. Now we have Jynx. Jynx is basically typing is absurdly amazing. Stats are pretty bad. Jynx also cannot use a big part of its personality. Pretty much its biggest trait, Lovely Kiss, in 1v1 because it's banned. Extremely physically frail. Not that fast. Not that strong. It has some uses with its ice type resistance and psychic resist while not being weak to electric. That's basically its niche. You just run Ice Beam, Psychic, Blizzard, Rest. Rest is useful for the likes of Chansey, Articuno, because you can just Psychic spam against that to lower its special. You can also potentially run counter. If I recall correctly, you need both Ice Beam and Blizzard for something. I'll put that up on the screen if I remember. But yeah, Jynx is just kind of mediocre. For the longest time I had it below the next Pokemon, Lapras. But, yeah, it's just, Jynx would be great if, for instance, it had, like, Alakazam stats. That would be absurdly good. But we're just stuck with this kind of Jynx, and it's kind of mediocre. Now we have Lapras. Basically, run Ice Beam, Reflect, Rest, and then one of T-Bolt or Blizzard. T-Bolt's actually the main option. You can do decently well into certain Starmies with T-Bolt. Blizzard basically gives you more chances to freeze and a bit more of a damaging option if you need it. You just try to be bulky, because Lapras is very bulky. Try to freeze your opponent. You have a quad resistance to ice, which is actually kind of cool, but of course you're weak to electric, similar to Articuno. It's very similar to Articuno. Often I would just recommend to use Articuno. It has a couple things going over Articuno. I don't remember what they are off the top of my head. I mean, I guess the biggest thing is T-Bolt, so you can do better into Starmie. But overall, I don't know. It's pretty mediocre. That's a lot of these Pokemon I've had. Now we have Kabutops. It hasn't really gotten any play. This is more of a theory Pokemon than anything else. Basically, the idea is you have an ice resistance and a normal resistance on a Sword Stance Pokemon. That's pretty cool. You can potentially break through the likes of Earthquakeless Tauros. You can break through Thunderboltless or Reflect. Well, yeah, Lax needs both Reflect and Thunderbolt to beat Kabu, so it does very well into most Snorlaxes, very well into a lot of Tauroses. Body Slam, Hyper Beam, Surf, Sword Stance, Surf is to hit like Rhydon. You're mainly just using Sword Stance, Body Slam, Hyper Beam. It's alright. The tiny bit of testing I've done with it, it's alright. Pretty solid speed stat. You can outspeed stuff like Lapras, Sandslash. Though unfortunately, I don't think you don't beat T-Bolt Chansey, but I think you do okay into Reflect Chansey. I don't remember. You might need to rely on like Sword Stancing 3 times. Don't get frozen. It's awkward. Now we have Venu. As previously mentioned, it's basically like Exeggutor, but less consistent, but beats Lapras with Razor Leaf. It's like Hitmonlee, but less consistent, but beats Hitmonlee. Yeah, it's extremely niche. Wouldn't recommend it overall. It's basically just Exeggutor, faster, so you can actually beat Lapras. The speed doesn't matter outside of that, really. I guess you speed tie Dragonite, but that's not a great thing. Like, it's like, wow, you beat Dragonite. Poison typing is just a detriment. Like, I guess you can't be toxic, but everything that's gonna toxic would want to toxic you. You either already would beat, even if you were just pure grass, or you would lose to anyway. Like, Alakazam has Psychic. In fact, you kind of wish you were not poison type, because then you'd have better odds into Jolteon, because Jolteon can just pin missile you and hit you quad effective. Stats are like whatever. It's like somewhat bulky, somewhat strong, somewhat fast. Main thing is Razor Leaf auto crits with its speed stat. So it does hit kind of hard. But not hard enough to really carve out too big of a niche for it. Yeah. Now we have Raichu, T-Bolt, Surf, Rest, and then one of Toxic or Thunder. I prefer Thunder. Thunder gives you better odds into Starmie, because unfortunately, in order to beat Starmie somewhat consistently, you need Thunder for the extra damage. Toxic is useful for non-rest Chansey, and maybe for other stuff. The idea behind Raichu is, unlike other electrics, primarily Jolteon, but also Zapdos, you give up the matchup against the grass types, but you beat Rhydon with Surf. I managed to pull this off in a tournament. It was cool. Raichu also just has much worse stats, meaning it has much worse matchups into all of the things that electrics want to beat. Like, I mean, it needs Thunder for both Starmie and Articuno. I forgot to mention Articuno as well, which just sucks because you have to land it. You have to actually give up a move slot for it because you can't also run Toxic. It's very sad, but it does okay into Zapdos. You lose to Jolteon. It does... It's like... Yeah, I mean... Not too much else to say about it, honestly. It's funny, but oftentimes it's actually overshadowed by, believe it or not, Blizzard Thunderbolt Lax has a lot of the same matchups as Raichu, though of course you can run a different Lax alongside Raichu, which is a thing, I guess. And now we have some of the worst Pokemon. Like, these are like the bottom of the barrel. Starting off with Moltres. Moltres has so much potential. Like, look at those stats, they're great. Fire flying typing is garbage. Quad weakness to rock only affects Rhydon, but like you're not breaking through Rhydon anyway. Main thing is you're weak to both ice and electric because fire types in this gen are not resistant to ice moves. So you get hit super effectively by Ice Beam, Blizzard, and Thunderbolt, which is awful. Stab Fire Blast is very strong. Unfortunately, Moltres does not get Flamethrower. Last bit of post-production murm here, I think. With Moltres, it can't learn Flamethrower. I originally had gone on a weird tangent on why it can't learn it. I don't believe the stuff I said was 100% correct, so I just cut it out. But not getting Flamethrower really sucks. I mean, one, you'd love to have it just because its move pool is pretty dire. I mean, you see that he has Toxic, but it doesn't really... Like, it's just for Chansey. And obviously beating Chansey is nice, but, like, it's already weak to Ice Beam and Thunderbolt. It's not the most reliable. But also the fact that you have to rely on Fire Blast's 85% accuracy, which is quite unfortunate, especially because a lot of KOs, notable one being Tauros, for instance, are Fire Blast, and then if they had Flamethrower, Flamethrower would get the 2 a KO. It's similar to how Articuno or Zapdos runs both an inaccurate move and an accurate move, and they can KO Tauros with that. Not having that option on Moltres really is unfortunate, and from my understanding, it seems like an oversight, which just kind of sucks, but that's kind of why not having Flamethrower is awful on Moltres. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, like, on paper, Moltres seems solid, but in reality, it's kind of worse Articuno that beats Articuno. But a big part about Articuno is its ability to freeze fish. This thing can't freeze fish. It can burn fish. Burn does the same amount of damage it does in current gens, which is 1/16. But 30% chance is solid. You can do okay against some physical attackers. So even with burn chance, Articuno is still better into the likes of Tauros and Snorlax. So yeah, Moltres is just kind of sad. In fact, it probably should be lower than this, but we'll see. I don't know. Now we have Persian, which is something I figured out like yesterday. I was talking in the RBY chord about it. Basically, Body Slam. The big thing about Persian over other normal types is the speed. It's the fastest normal type, and has access to Screech, which halves the it lowers the defense stat by 2. Though unfortunately, it's not that accurate. It's basically like a Sword Stance in this metagame. It's a Sword Stance that can miss, and Screech into Body Slam into Hyper Beam KOs a lot of things. It KOs even the likes of non-reflex Snorlax, which is huge. And the thing is, though, Persian has awful bulk and awful stats in general outside of its speed. So how does it get this off? Well, it creates a 50-50 with Growl. That's how. The idea is you Screech turn 1 on a Body Slam, and then if you predict them going for Hyper Beam, you can Growl them, which will cause their Hyper Beam to not KO you, and then from there you can Body Slam into Hyper Beam them yourself, which is really cool. Though it's not the most reliable thing, because it's a 50-50, right? Now it can run some other stuff over Growl. Slash can also be run over Body Slam if you're not running like stuff. Slash is an auto crit move. In this gen, it's like the thing Persian's known for the most in RBY, so you might be surprised to not see it on the main set. Bubble Beam is useful for Rhydon. Thunderbolt gives you like a 48-ish% chance to beat Starmie because you speed tie it. You can get like you can get the para chance, but they can also psychic drop you. I would mainly stick to this personally, but yeah, Persian's it's not that good, but it has a very small thing going for it. Now we have Clef, a Pokemon I definitely discounted earlier. Basically, it's very similar to... Well, I brought it up because Dragonite, which is the last Pokemon. Yeah, this is coming to an end, I know. Now, it's basically bad Tauros, but with counter or reflect. Its speed barely outspeeds Exeggutor, which is useful, because unlike Lax, it beats Eggy. Now, the main moveset is Body Slam, Hyper Beam, Blizzard, Counter. You can also run Fire Blast, Reflect. I mean, like, I would mainly stick with Blizzard, Counter, or Fire Blast, Reflect, because Fire Blast helps if you need to go for the burn against the likes of Tauros and Snorlax. Body Slam and a Hyper Beam can kill, like, Alakazam, though, of course, you have to be careful about recover, but you can potentially just spam Body Slam until you get a para, which is really nice. Something else to keep in mind is, in Generation 1, if you Hyper Beam and to beat down a substitute, you won't have that recharge turn. So you can potentially just Hyper Beam on a sub. Though that's not too useful against Zam, because you can just Body Slam against the sub. Anyway, Blizzard hits Egg hard. Fire Blast gives up the Rhydon matchup, but burn chance is nice. Counter or Reflect is to try to beat the normals. And lastly, we have Dragonite. Dragon flying typing, awful. Electric neutrality, ice quad weakness. The idea behind this was just to try to beat a random assortment of things like Alakazam with extremely strong Body Slam and a Hyper Beam. Like, these stats are great, obviously. You have Blizzard for stuff like Rhydon, Eggy. You have Thunderbolt to try to maybe beat down something. Who knows? You can also run another move here. It doesn't have its main option, which it's known for in RBY, being Wrap. I guess you can also run Fire Blast here. I don't know. This is also something that really hasn't gotten much play. I brought it once during RBY 1v1 Cup, but I didn't use it. The main reason to use this over Clefable is basically just that it has a better better Exeggutor matchup because it takes less from Psychic and does a bit more with Blizzard or Fire Blast or whatever than Clef does. In fact, you might even be able to run Ice Beam in this last slot to help with that matchup even further. And it also has a much better matchup in Venusaur, which Clef just loses to. But, oh no, you lose to Venusaur. Oh no. Yeah, I don't really recommend Dragonite too highly, but it definitely has a very, very, very small niche. Maybe. It might also just be outclassed by Tauros. So that's really all the Pokemon I have ranked right now. We can go over some honorable mentions as well. Cloyster. Basically just worse Lapras. Doesn't have Thunderbolt. You're like, oh wow, look at the defense stat. But with the low HP stat, it's only marginally more physically bulkier than Lapras. It's only a tiny bit faster, and it's much weak. It's a little bit weaker. So it's just not really worth using Cloyster at all. Some other important Pokemon to mention. Electabuzz can maybe do something with Screech into Hyper Beam while having electric moves. You outspeed Zapdos. Wouldn't really recommend it overall. Golduck and Poliwrath can do stuff with Amnesia while being faster than Eggy, but they don't really do much outside of that. You can pretend to beat Snorlax and Chansey with Poliwrath's submission, but it really does not work. I would not recommend it overall. Vaporeon. A lot of people used this in RBY 1v1 Cup, and I can see why. Its stats are amazing. But, like, just use Starmie or even Lapras. Like, it has great stats, but it's just... it doesn't have anything. Its move pool is dire. So I just don't recommend using that at all. Gyarados, for a bit, I thought it could maybe be useful. It's like Dragonite that can beat Jynx. But then I found out about Clefable, and Clefable basically does everything Gyarados does and more. So, would not recommend Gyarados. There are maybe some other Pokemon. Electrode is funny. We thought, this isn't because Electrode's even remotely has anything going for it. We just thought Electrode could beat stuff with Screech Hyper Beam along with its amazing speed. But with the combination of Screech accuracy, Hyper Beam accuracy, the fact that you need to land 3 Screeches into a Hyper Beam, and the fact that you can crit through your Screeches to not get a kill. It turned out Electrode had like a 40% chance to win the matchups it needed to win. So, yeah. Is there anything I'm missing here? Machamp, don't use it. It's just basically worse Hitmonlee. Same thing with Primeape, unfortunately. I thought Primeape could do stuff with Screech, but it just can't. Submission is just such a bad move to have to rely on. There might be some other honorable mentions I'm forgetting about here. And obviously, if you can think of anything else, feel free to mention it. I'm happy to hear any suggestions about this metagame. I love this metagame so much. It's so paradoxical, but it just works very well. At least to me. Most people don't like it. Obviously, with all the hacks running around between a lot of moves like Body Slam and Psychic having really high odds of just messing with the game. You have Freeze instantly winning the game and really high crit rates. Definitely people consider it a big mess, but I don't know. It's a very fun mess to me, if that makes sense. Anyway, this box, or the boxes that I used for this, will be in the description. RBY 1v1 Discord link, and resources are there if you're interested. Also, feel free to message me or put down in the comments any questions or suggestions you have about the metagame. I'll be happy to answer. I probably missed a lot of stuff. Even with editing, I doubt I'll be able to capture everything about this decently complex metagame. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks for listening. Farewell.